And this is Maestro on behalf of the Boxing Voice. I'm here with a legend in my eyes. All right, Mr. Barry Jones. I think you're one of the best analysts in the sport. You're here from the UK covering this fight. How are you doing, and what are your thoughts so far about being here in New York City?
Yeah, firstly, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here, and it's been mega, hasn't it? You know, like when people, there's been a big story built up about, this is the biggest women's fight in history. It's a huge event, and you sort of think it is the biggest fight in women's boxing, but is it a huge event? I thought it was. You're never quite sure until you get here. But the feel all week has been that it is a little bit special, and the weigh-in today was just as good as I've been to anywhere. And I mean, I've been to Canelo's, Joshua's, Ricky Hatton fight, Joe Kawasaki fight, where the crowd really get behind them. And this was all as good as that. It was fantastic.
Well, let's talk about that for a little bit, because the crowd was here. They had WWE people involved. We had an Irish crowd. We had a Puerto Rican crowd. Give us a sense of your thoughts about it, being here in the audience, observing everything.
Yeah, well, I think it's a different twist, isn't it? Getting characters from a different sport, and they're very good actors, aren't they? The WWE superstars, and I wasn't sure it would gel. To be fair, I thought it would be a little bit too superficial. But I think it worked fantastic, and the crowd ate it up. From day one. The Puerto Rican crowd were louder than I expected, because it's very, very rarely, actually never, does an Irish crowd get drowned out by anybody. But the Puerto Ricans gave as good as they got, and they started to chant first, and they literally, with the loudest voice until the Irish really got going. To be fair, yeah, and I think the crowd reflected pretty much what the fight's going to be like. I think it's going to be an evenly matched contest where the Puerto Rican, which is Amanda Serrano, is going to be the one taking the initiative first, and it's going to be up to Katie Taylor then to respond to that.
Well, there you go. Being a former world champion yourself, talk to me a little bit about the tactics that are going to be required from these two combatants tomorrow night. You got Katie Taylor with her an Olympic background, but she's pretty much stayed at this weight class for the most part. And you've got Amanda Serrano that's kind of been jumping up and down in weight. What do you think each of these two fighters needs to do to be successful tomorrow night?
I think for Serrano, because she's the bigger puncher, and that's the way she fights. She's aggressive, but there's thought behind the work. She's not like a Delphine Pursoon who just recklessly comes forward and uses physical strength. It's power and guile to her work. So I think that's a real plus to her. But ultimately, she is the one who's going to have to put the foot on the gas. She's the one who's going to have to force Katie Taylor to make a mistake, put her under pressure. And for Katie, that in and out movement with the feet. People say she's been stayed in amateur style too long, but it's worked for her. She's got less stoppages because of that. But she's been able to have longevity and stay out of trouble in most fights, not all, but most. And even though she's slowed down a bit now, I still think her boxing brain and movement is very difficult to come up against. I think what Katie Taylor does so well is she plays a game of patience in those early close rounds where there's nip and tuck, and she just nicks the round, and she makes you panic before she does. So then you commit when you're not quite ready, because you're thinking this round's too close, I've got to do something, and you overcommit. And that's where that little half a step back, and she comes back with a three-punch combination quite regularly. That always works for her. I think what we found when she fought Delphine Pursoon is Pursoon didn't throw the one shot or two shots, and when Katie stepped back, Pursoon just kept throwing. And she had to take a shot, but she walked through, and I think that's in the first fight where most people, certainly I thought Pursoon did enough to win that first fight. Even the second fight was extremely controversial, maybe unclose. I think that's a blueprint, but the problem is you've got to take punches doing that, and I think even as tough as Amanda Serrano is, she won't want to take punches because she has ability. So I think it'll be aggression, but it's going to have to be controlled aggression. But ultimately, you've got to try and slow Katie Taylor's feet down. That's the key for her. But Katie, the only thing I like when worried about Katie is she goes back in straight lines, and it works for her. But now at this level, she's going to have to pivot more on the front foot, get on the outside of the southpaw stance of Serrano, and if she can do that, I fancy her to win. And I also think, I saw at the press conference, and the shoulders and the back of Serrano look massive. I thought, naturally, because she's a featherweight, really. Although she's gone up and down the weight, she's been super fly, she's been super lightweight, but she's really a featherweight. And I thought, at the press conference, I thought, actually, she doesn't look like that. But today, at the weigh-in, she looked like a featherweight to me.
Not like a lightweight.
No, she looked like a featherweight. I'm not saying, listen, she's good enough to control that, but I think, no, she's at the top. I think that physical size and presence, it's the physical presence more than the strength and the weight. The physical presence, when you're a bigger person, you make someone panic just by nicking the space. And when someone's bigger than you, they don't feel under so much pressure because they don't have that physical size to intimidate them. And that might be where I'd probably favour Katie Taylor.
Got it. Look, we talked about how riled up this crowd was for the main event. Let's look at the co-feature for a second. We've got Jessie Vargas, and we've got Liam Smith, one of 4 Smith brothers, the Fighting Smith family. I don't think I've ever seen Jessie Vargas as fired up for a fight as I saw today, and Liam Smith has ignited something in him. Liam Smith seems ready to go. Jessie Vargas seems ready to go. This has the potential to steal the show. I don't know. I'm excited about this fight as well. Give us your thoughts on the fight and break it down as well for us if you can.
Yeah, sure. It's a great fight. Great clash of styles as well, to be honest. And I think you've got 2 fighters here. Liam Smith, by the way, gets under everyone's skin. He smiles, but Liam Smith's an incredibly tough, hard man. That's what he is. In fact, that he can box helps, but he's just a naturally tough guy. I know Jessie Vargas is a tough guy, but he doesn't know he's more of a boxer. But so he gets into people's skin.
Politician now too.
Politician, that's right. I don't get involved in all that. I quite like him. Don't let me dislike him naturally, no. But either, I think it's a good clash of styles. Jessie Vargas saying he's going to knock him out. I think when you look at Liam Smith's fights, he comes forward with a high guard. So he technically just walks forward in straight lines, but he actually slips and slides. So he'll slip inside or outside of your jab and come back with a left hook and rolls underneath. So there's more guile to his work than actually you would think, to be fair. But he is sometimes easy to hit, even though he blocks quite effectively. So Vargas trying to knock him out would be a mistake. He's got to use his boxing skills and ability. But ultimately, they're both no more for their losses than their wins. That's the weird thing about it. So there's no one on. I think on paper, Vargas has better wins, but against naturally smaller guys and guys probably on the tail end of their careers who weren't the fighters who they were when they were somebody, if that makes any sense. And Liam Smith really hasn't beat anyone of any massive name. Now, you were certainly in the States, so you would go, that's an outstanding win. But he's had good wins, so I tend to think that. But I favour Smith. I'm not just going for all the home fighters, though Katie Taylor's Irish, but I'm Welsh, so we're Gaelic, so we'll call her one of mine. But I still think that Smith is physically going to be too strong for him. Unless Smith has aged or waned, I think that's going to be the issue and the problem. But I'm not sure that he's out the gas yet.
Too harsh to call this kind of a relegation match. I mean, I'm a football fan. Some of the most exciting matches in football in the English Premier League are relegation matches where one team is trying to survive to stay at the championship or premiership level, and the loser may not get that many more opportunities. Fair to say that this is something kind of similar for the winner gets to live on, and the loser maybe harder road to a championship again?
I do, because because their age and where they've been, and obviously because they had a few losses as well, their markability will reduce dramatically if they lose. So it is one of those fights where it's all or nothing, and that's why I think you're right. This might steal the show. It's a great fight, absolutely fantastic fight.
Last thing, I had an exchange on Twitter with you last year, believe it or not. You didn't know who I was at the time, but that's fine. I brought up the issue of fighter pay and fighter representation. And it's funny because since that time, Jake Paul has taken that upon himself to kind of push it, increase fighter pay. He's also mentioned the fact that maybe fighters should be in a union, like the NFL here or the Major League Baseball, NBA. They're all in unions. We had a pretty good discussion about it yesterday. I'm not saying we got to go in as much detail, but give me your thoughts on that.
Theoretically, it's a great thing. The boxers have someone to give them a voice. There's equal pay is impossible because it's all about your markability. It's not like you're playing for a team, and I think it's very difficult to do that. And also, how are you going to have a union and then get Canelo to strike because the sixth rounder has been mistreated or underpaid or not being paid? That's not going to happen. So all these things are great, but they could be better representation, a fairer union. What we need is a universal. We're not going to get these things, so it's irrelevant to talk about. A universal body that looks after the global brand of boxing. That's what we need. But with that becomes a monopoly, and then with the monopoly becomes disdain, and with disdain you get fractions. hence the WBC, WBA, WO, and IBF. So it ends up going back together, and I think we are where we are, and we've got to make the most of it. A lot of this, like, world titles have less meaning than they've ever had before. But we're getting fantastic fights now. We sort of sometimes forget that. We'll look back and go, actually, that wasn't as bad as we thought, except we just never knew who the best fighter in the world was because we didn't know which title meant more than the other. But this just, I'm getting older now, so I'm getting a little bit more philosophical, if I can say the word. But let's just enjoy the fights, I think. And tonight, tomorrow night's going to be like a good show. There's a couple of good fights. There's a good fight for women's boxing to bring that forward because it needs it. Let's be honest, it still needs it. And obviously next week we've got Canelo, and that's a huge event. And let's just enjoy it while we're in it.
Lastly, Jake Paul's gotten a lot of slack from some of the boxing purists, and I'm using air quotes off camera here.
The video, feel free to hit the like, subscribe, and share. As always, if you want to support us to the next level, head over to the patreon.com/ThaBoxingVoice. We have tons of exclusive from Border Wars, Entitled, betting shows, the list goes on and on and on. But in addition to that, if you guys have questions for fighters, trainers, and promoters, this is where you can submit them. We will run out, get these questions answered, and put it back on the show just for you guys. Appreciate it. Peace.